I hope you're well. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to today's video, which is my January wrap-up, which is a little bit delayed, so my apologies. I started a new position at work in mid-January that has required some certifications that have taken up a lot of my nights and weekends. So that's why I also missed last week's upload. But I'm back, not going anywhere, and I wanted to talk about the books that I read in January because considering the last few months that I've had reading-wise, that's the most reading I've done in a single month in a very, very long time. I read 6 books, which is nothing like what I used to read, but I'm pretty chuffed with myself. So we're gonna dive into the books. One more note, just because I know people have made comments. Some people find the ring light in my glasses really distracting. Unfortunately, it is after dark, so we have to film this way. So bear with me, I apologize in advance. But why don't we dive right in? Okay then, so the first book that we're going to talk about is not something that normally features on this channel, and it's going first because I didn't know how to give it a star rating, so I didn't. But that is Brené Brown's Dare to Lead, Brave Work, Tough Conversations, Whole Hearts. And this is actually a business self-help book that I read for work because I've been having these sort of leadership sessions with our EVP, and this was a book that she wanted me to read and for us to discuss together. I am not someone who reads self-help books, which is why I didn't feel like I could give it a great star rating because I don't know what I'd be comparing it to. I don't know what a great one is. I don't know what a bad one is. But I actually enjoyed this and found it very, very useful. I would say that it is not a book that is prescriptive in the sense that it's like, do these things and you'll be a good supervisor or manager. I feel like a lot of what this book does is it gives you kind of these tools for self-reflection that also help you to be a more compassionate and empathetic leader. And it gives you some prompts and ways to kind of have conversations, ways to ask questions, to be really co-collaborative. It's less about being like the boss who's like, okay, you do this, you do that, not having conversations, not listening to people. It's more about being that boss, being that leader who is open to conversations, can have the difficult talks, but has them with empathy in mind. And there were these things that are called rumble questions that she talks about and that I've actually been using at work and feel like are super useful. I would say that like there are a lot of sort of very saccharine expressions, but I do think that there's a lot in here, especially when it comes to being an empathetic leader and to kind of understanding the difference between like humiliation and shame and really addressing emotions and ways to create a very safe environment where people are open to having difficult conversations with you, are open to sharing their ideas with you, and aren't afraid of reprisals or of being called stupid or being dismissed. So I did think it was very good. It's definitely not going to be for everyone though. I did go through and mark a bunch of sections in it, but yeah, as far as a self-help book goes, the first self-help book I've really ever read, I thought it was a good start. The next book is one that I gave 2.5 stars to. It's Spare by Prince Harry. It's his memoir. I think everyone has heard about it, whether they wanted to or not at this point. It's been in the news forever and a day. I listened to it as an audiobook, which is narrated by Prince Harry himself. It was ghostwritten, but it is a memoir that covers basically the start of it is around the death of his mother, Princess Diana. and brings you up to more recent events, like the Duke and Duchess of Sussex stepping back as royals, moving to California during the pandemic, and actually like the prologue of the book, if that's what it's considered in this memoir, is set at around the time of Prince Philip's funeral. So where to start? Firstly, I'm not going to go into all this like sort of content, the like savory, spicy bits, because I do have a 45-minute vlog on the first half of the book. The vlog on the second half is probably coming to you next Sunday. It's almost edited, but as I said, things got away from me. What I really want to talk about here is what I think of it as a book and as a memoir. And giving it 2.5 stars kind of tells you what I think of it. I think that it is an entertaining read. Like, it gives you that insider scoop. There's a lot of sort of those he moments where he talks about like his frostbitten. YouTube doesn't like you saying that word, is what I've been told, so I won't say it, but his frostbitten nether regions, talking about losing his virginity and shrooms and his brother, like, conflict with his brother, conflict with his father, conflict with the media. It goes into all of those things. It's entertaining in that way, but I had issues with it as a book. I think, first of all, it's like 400 something pages. He's not yet 40. Like, it is a lot. It's a big book, and I feel like it could have been shorter, which blows my mind because he's made comments about how the first draft of it was like 800 pages. And I'm just kind of like, this dragged. And I think part of why it dragged was because so much of what was discussed in this book has already been discussed within an inch of its life in the Oprah interview, in the documentary, in the subsequent interviews he did to promote the book. It's all been said for the most part. Like, a lot of that sort of content is already done. The book itself figures a lot on the sort of adversarial relationship that exists between Harry and the media, the paps, and within his family, with his brother and his father, and even with the Princess of Wales, Catherine, and the Queen Consort, Camilla. Like, it's a lot of adversarial relationships there where Harry ends up being the victim and is painted, obviously in his own story, as the hero, but I did feel as though there was a lack of accountability on his part in certain ways. I think there were good learning moments for him, especially when it came to sort of racial inequality and prejudice and unconscious bias. He grew up in a gilded cage, and so he had a lot of growing to do, and I think he takes some responsibility for that. But when it comes to things within his own family, I don't feel like there was much accountability there. I felt as though a lot of the time he felt like things were being done to him, and there isn't a lot of like, okay, well, let's talk about how I might have contributed to this situation. Like, you have to understand that this is a one-sided perspective. Like, you're not getting the 360 view on this. It is just from his perspective. The other thing is that he's an unreliable narrator in his own memoir. There are so many moments in this book where he questions his own ability to remember details and brings that up, and I'm just like, that, the unreliable narrator works in fiction, like, I enjoy it in fiction, but I don't understand how it was supposed to read in this situation. Because, like, if we can't trust his recollections or his memory, it calls into question the entire contents of the book. And so that to me was like a hard thing to understand. Like, I didn't understand what the intent was there. So by and large, it was just a book that I felt like was too long. I feel like there was this unreliable narrator that I just couldn't shake how that made me feel. And then I just feel like, you know, at the end of the day, I wanted the book to educate or have some sort of almost like Aesop's fable type lesson to it, whether it was talking about like what to do about the media or what should change, or like ways that things can be improved to be more equitable. Or like, I feel like with his platform, he could have said so much and made this bigger than just about himself. But it did, in a lot of ways, just feel as though Prince Harry needed a platform to get his side of the story out there. He felt wronged, and he vented very publicly. So yeah, it was like, did I enjoy it? Did I read the like 15 hours of audiobook? Yes. Is it a book that I would read again? Absolutely not. Is it a book that I would necessarily recommend to people? I think if you are really obsessed with the royals, go for it. But I also feel like at this point you can watch vlogs, you can watch the interviews, you can read reviews on it, and you'll get the gist. You'll get the juicy bits that everyone wants to hear about, and you don't really need to read the book. So that's how I feel. All right. So the next book is a 3-star read for me. It is The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone by Tennessee Williams, which is a novella by the American playwright. I love Tennessee Williams. My senior thesis in college was on his plays. I read every single one of them in preparation for it. I just love them. And I also watched the movie adaptation of this because it starred Helen Mirren, and if you're an OG, you know how I feel about her. I adore her. So I was very excited to pick this up finally. I think it's appeared on several TBRs on this channel, and I finally got to it. I will say, like, the margins on this book are like insane. Like, do you see this? Like, so much white space. Not so much on the sides, but the bottom is insane. But in any case, I gave this 3 stars because it was okay. I think it hits all the notes of a Tennessee Williams play without as much sort of life to it. Like, the plays to me, even if you've never seen one acted, they like jump off the page. Like, you can envision every single thing. There's a strange like physicality and understanding of space, and it's just very, very theatrical. Whereas I didn't feel like that was as much the case here. The book is about this American actress, Karen Stone, who is kind of living an aimless existence in Rome after her husband's death. She's kind of seen her career fizzle after not a wise decision to play Juliet at her age. She is older, and she's coming to grips with aging and this loss of beauty and sensuality that she's feeling, and she ends up in this relationship with a young Roman gigolo, and it is very cruel, very sort of tumultuous, and it's brutal at times. Like, the relationship between them. It is very much the dark sort of side of life that I feel like Tennessee Williams does really well. There is a sort of unvarnished truth that again can be really brutal that he talks about. And I think it's an interesting look at women of a certain age in this sort of very singular situation, I guess. But the reason that I gave it 3 stars is because I do feel like it lacked some of what I really enjoy in Tennessee Williams plays. I also feel like, you know, what does he really know about women aging as a man? And I do feel like it gives you kind of that one side, kind of depressing look at that part of life without being very uplifting. Like, this is not an uplifting book. Karen is really interesting as a character. I like the depth to her. I think there's a lot there, but I do feel like the other characters in the book are all painted very viciously and are very much the bad guys without any redeeming qualities, so they do feel a little bit one-sided. Whereas Karen does feel fully developed, but like the gigolo, whose name I've forgotten at this point, like he just feels very one-sided, flat, because all he is mean. And that's kind of how the other characters are in the book are as well, with the exception of Karen. So, that is what I will say about that. I would say if you're interested, because you like Tennessee Williams, give it a shot. But I feel like the movie was okay. Like, again, I love Helen Mirren. Didn't think a ton of the movie either. So, moving right along to a 4-star read, we have Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont by Elizabeth Taylor. No, not that. Elizabeth Taylor. I got very excited, I will say, when I thought it was her. I don't know why I thought she might have written a novel. Not the same one. But in any case, this was a really, really sweet, endearing, and somewhat sad look at aging. There seems to be a theme here, because there's another book in this mix about an older protagonist. But I really enjoyed this a lot. I was kind of waffling between a 3.5 and a 4 until I got to the ending, and then the ending made it all worthwhile. But this is a book about Mrs. Palfrey, Laura Palfrey, who is the widow of, I believe he's a colonial administrator of some sort. And she ends up moving into a hotel in London, which is inhabited by a cast of English pensioners who've all moved into this hotel, which is an easier alternative to like taking care of an apartment or a home. Basically, they have their room, they get served dinner, they have all the perks of living in a hotel. But they basically live here together, and it's a lot about their day-to-day life, going through the doldrums, trying to fight away loneliness, and also fend off the Grim Reaper. And the cast of characters is really endearing. Like, all of them are terribly sweet, a little bit eccentric, but there's something just very, very adorable about them all. The book really focuses on Mrs. Palfrey, as you would assume from the title. She moves into this hotel and early on talks about her grandson Desmond, who she thinks is going to visit her, and when he doesn't, she becomes very, very embarrassed, and so she ends up convincing this other young man, Ludo, to impersonate Desmond. And so a lot of the book also has to do with the relationship between Mrs. Palfrey and Ludo and this like unseen grandson. But I will say it is a very, very quiet book. This is definitely not plot driven. The appeal is really getting to know these characters in their day-to-day lives. Not a whole lot happens until probably the last 30 or 40 pages of the book. So if you're someone who needs a lot of activity and a lot of plot, this is not going to be for you. It is very much a character piece. It is very much about kind of the beauty of everyday life and routine, but it's also this kind of heartbreaking look at aging when you start to feel disconnected from the world and from people. Like, the loneliness of these pensioners is what's really, really palpable. They long for visits from relatives. Like, that gives them something to look forward to. And I forget the name of the character, but like, there's a day she's supposed to be going on a picnic with a relative, and it's pouring, like raining cats and dogs, and there's just so much anxiety over perhaps this picnic not happening. And they get, in addition to like longing for those visits and living for those visits, there's this sense of that they're not really part of the world around them in London. They're kind of seeing things and observing things, but not participating in it completely. And it is really lonely. And so it's kind of nice to have like a character of Ludo flits in and flits out. But I thought it was a very sweet book. And the ending, lots of things happen in those last 30 to 40 pages, as I said, which is what made the book go from a 3.5 to a 4-star for me. It was a sneaky ending. I will say that. Onwards to my 2 5-star reads in January. The first is Moon Tiger by Penelope Lively, which is a reread for me. It's a modern classic, hence the little penguin in modern classic over here, about Claudia Hampton, who is a writer, a very witty individual, very egotistical individual, but in the course of this book, she is on her deathbed, and she decides to write the history of the world, according to Claudia Hampton, kind of using her life as a lens through which to view the world and the history of the world. I have spoken a lot about this book on my channel. It is a reread. It is a book that I read last January, actually. Fell in love with it, couldn't shut up about it, and it's probably a book that's been added to favorite books of all time. Like, this is one of these books that I can see myself reading again and again. Like, there are certain books I can do that with. This is one of them. I also feel like it's a book that I probably will want to read every year. Like, this is is it Rules of Civility that Olive reads every year? I just love it. I think it is such a smart book, such a sharp book. The observations that Claudia makes on like humanity and like history and the language and just like all of these very like woo sort of lofty subjects, they just speak to me. Claudia as a narrator, she's someone that I wish like I could meet in person, because she is just so witty, and she just has this like sharpness that is almost mean, but not quite. Like it's just breathtaking, wow, and I love it. The book is primarily, like, as I said, she is on her deathbed and the present timeline of the book, but most of it is looking back at her life from the time she was a child up until her death. And so you get a very sort of sweeping novel in a very short and concise number of pages. You really get to see her relationship with different individuals, including her brother, which is slightly incestuous. I will say that as a trigger warning. Actually, it's maybe not slightly. It is. there's a little Game of Thrones-ness going on there. There's the relationship with her daughter, the relationship with her daughter's father, relationship with a lover during World War II. It's kind of really this sweeping history because she has lived through a lot. And she talks about, at this one point, about people being the frontliners in history, like actively participating in it. And you can very much sense that that is who she is. She's very active and engaged. Whereas there are people who sit on the sidelines, like her mother, or the people who are just like written out of it, like her father. So there are interesting observations here. And what I do really like about the book is that when she's looking back at these particular scenes that are important in her life, a lot of the times you'll have her perspective, but then you'll have the perspective of the other people in the room with her. So if, for example, she's in the car with her brother and his wife, you'll get all three perspectives to some degree. And so I really liked that quite a bit as a like device here. But I love it. This book you're gonna keep hearing about and keep seeing on this channel, so I apologize if you get tired of it, but I never will. I just won't. So the last book I want to talk about is another 5-star. It is The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. Now, full disclosure, this book took me a very, 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 very long time to finish. I started listening to the audiobook in, I want to say, July or August. And then my reading slump hit and all the stuff with the house hit. And I just lost steam and kind of went into this reading slump. But I was enjoying it so very much. Like, to the point that I had very vivid memories of what was happening, so that I didn't even need to restart the audiobook months later because I knew exactly where I had left off. And I think that is, like, that tells you how good a book it is, that it is that vivid and that memorable. I really enjoyed it though. It did just take me a very long time to finish it. I think also the reason it took me so long to start back up was because I was at this point where I knew it was going to be embarrassing for the characters involved, and I have the worst case of secondhand embarrassment. That's why I can't watch comedies. Like, I can't watch comedies, movies, TV shows, anything like that, because I physically feel uncomfortable and anxious when people do things that are truly embarrassing. And so I knew it was coming. But in any case, The Heart Principle is a really diverse romance, like Helen Huang's other books, The Kiss Quotient, which I know made it to rounds when it first came out. I really enjoyed that book as well. I actually think there is a chance that I prefer this one to that, which is saying something, because I really enjoyed The Kiss Quotient. But Anna is a neurodivergent main character. She is also a musician, and she's kind of paralyzed by her viral moment, and has been struggling to finish songs, and is really taken advantage of by her family. They just have a lot of expectations of her that don't necessarily align with who she is as a person. She has an ass hat as a boyfriend at the beginning of the book who decides, like, hey, we should have an open relationship before you know the inevitable, which is we get married. And that's what kind of starts the book off. She is very upset by this and decides that she needs to get under someone. You know that song where you can't get over until you get under? Yeah, that's kind of what she's aiming for. She wants to have a one-night stand, kind of make the boyfriend jealous, but also be like, if you can do this, I can do this. And that's where Quan comes in, because he's looking for someone to sleep with to help him get over his insecurities post illness, which I think was a form of testicular cancer, although I don't know if they ever say it outright in the book. But whatever illness he's had, it's changed his body, and he just feels really uncomfortable with the idea of getting naked in front of anyone. So they end up trying to meet up, and they have a series of dates that don't go exactly to plan. But it is a truly sweet, romantic, steamy love story between these two. Anna is adorable. Quan with his motorcycle and just the rest of his bravado is just amazing. But then to also have this character that has so much masculinity about him still feel fragile and have these insecurities just makes him feel incredibly, incredibly real to me. The kicker in this book is really that Anna's family experiences a tragedy which throws her into a role that she's just not equipped to handle. This is also at the same time that she's trying to come to terms with the fact that maybe she's neurodivergent, maybe she's on the spectrum, and her family just dismissing it and not wanting to go there. So there's a lot of this book that is about acceptance, self-acceptance, as well as being accepted by others. And I think the way that Quan handles Anna and the way that they just support each other and the way that they have to overcome the challenges in their own personal lives in order to really show up within a relationship for one another is just beautiful. I think that is why I liked this romance so much, because yeah, the romance is the focal point, but there is just so much texture and variety and so much going on character development wise with each of these characters that, like, at times the romance sometimes feels secondary. Like, sometimes it is really about Anna's self-exploration and self-discovery, and sometimes it really is about Quan trying to really embrace who he is now. And that's kind of what was beautiful about it. The characters are great, like the Helen Huang books, and I just really had a great time with it. And the audiobook was also really good in my opinion, so I will give that a shout out. But yeah, despite the fact that it took me a million years to read, I really, really enjoyed this book. So yeah, those are the books that I read in January. Like I said, some were great, others were meh, but you win some, you lose some. It was overall a really satisfactory January reading-wise. Hopefully there are a couple books that you've added to your physical TBR. I will say I put links to all these books in the description box. You might have noticed that I now have Amazon and bookshop.org. So if you do use any of those links, I do get a little commission. Obviously, that is voluntary. You don't have to. It just helps support this channel and my book purchasing habits. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe, because that means the world to me and it'll help this little channel reach 1,000 subscribers. Finally. Thank you so much, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye!